Robert Bobby Martinez adjusted his worn baseball cap as he approached the customer service counter at Harrison's electronic superstore. The cap bore the faded emblem of the 1st Infantry Division, a reminder of his service in Vietnam nearly 50 years ago. At 72, Bobby moved with the careful precision of a man whose joints remembered too many long marches through jungle terrain and too many nights sleeping on hard ground. The store buzzed with typical weekend activity. Families browsed the television displays, while teenagers tested gaming headphones, and elderly couples debated the merits of different tablet models. Bobby had driven 45 minutes from his small apartment in Millerville to reach this particular store, drawn by their advertised military discount program that promised 15% off all purchases for veterans. Behind the customer service counter stood Derek Hoffman, a 28-year-old assistant manager who had worked at Harrison's for 3 years. Derek prided himself on running a tight ship during his shifts, maintaining what he considered professional standards that kept the riffraff from taking advantage of store policies. He wore his company polo shirt with the pride of someone who believed his position granted him authority over the customers he served. Bobby approached the counter carrying a modest purchase, a basic tablet computer priced at $349. He had researched the device thoroughly, reading online reviews and comparing specifications for weeks before making his decision. The tablet would allow him to video call his daughter in Oregon and his son stationed in Germany with the Army. Technology had never come easily to Bobby, but he understood its importance for staying connected with family scattered across the globe. "Good afternoon," Bobby said politely, placing the tablet box on the counter. "I'd like to purchase this, and I understand you offer a military discount for veterans." Derek glanced up from his computer screen with barely concealed irritation. Weekend customers always wanted something special, some exception to normal procedures that would complicate his otherwise routine transactions. He looked Bobby up and down, taking in the worn jeans, the scuffed work boots, and the baseball cap that had seen better days. "Military discount requires proper identification," Derek said curtly. "You got a military ID?" Bobby reached into his wallet and produced his Veterans Affairs medical card and his driver's license, which listed his veteran status. These were the same documents he had used successfully at dozens of other businesses that offered military discounts. The VA card showed his service-connected disability rating, a permanent reminder of the shrapnel wounds he had sustained during the Tet Offensive in 1968. Derek examined the cards with exaggerated scrutiny, holding them up to the light as if checking for forgeries. He had processed military discounts before, but something about Bobby's appearance bothered him. The man looked too ordinary, too unremarkable to have served his country. Derek had grown up watching action movies where soldiers were portrayed as larger-than-life heroes, not quiet older men who shopped for basic electronics. "This medical card doesn't prove military service," Derek announced, sliding the documents back across the counter. "And veteran status on a driver's license could mean anything. You could have worked as a janitor on a base for all I know." Bobby's expression remained calm, though his hands tightened slightly around the edge of the counter. 49 years had passed since he returned from Southeast Asia to a country that often treated its veterans with suspicion and hostility. He had hoped those days were behind him, but apparently some attitudes died hard. "Sir, I served with the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam from 1967 to 1969, Bobby explained patiently. "The VA card is issued specifically to veterans who serve in combat zones. Perhaps you could check with your manager about your military discount policy?" Derek's jaw tightened at the suggestion that he didn't understand store policy. He had been assistant manager for 8 months and took pride in his authority. The idea that this old man was questioning his judgment felt like a personal challenge to his competence. "I know the policy perfectly well," Derek snapped. "We need a current military ID or discharge papers. Those are the rules. I'm not giving discounts to people who can't prove they actually served." The conversation had begun to draw attention from nearby customers. A young mother shopping with her children glanced over nervously, while an elderly couple exchanged disapproving looks at Derek's increasingly hostile tone. Bobby noticed the stares, but remained focused on the man behind the counter. I understand you need to verify eligibility, Bobby said quietly. My discharge papers are at home, but the VA card should be sufficient proof. It's issued by the Department of Veterans Affairs specifically to those who served. Derek crossed his arms and shook his head firmly. Not good enough. Anyone can get one of those cards. You want the discount, you bring proper documentation. What Derek didn't know was that Bobby Martinez had earned 3 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Silver Star during his 2 tours in Vietnam. He had led men through some of the most dangerous territory in the war, pulling wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire and making split-second decisions that saved dozens of lives. The quiet dignity he displayed now was the same calm leadership that had carried his platoon through impossible situations decades ago. Bobby studied Derek's face for a long moment, recognizing the stubbornness of someone who had made up his mind and wouldn't be swayed by reason. He had encountered similar attitudes before, usually from people who had never faced real adversity and didn't understand the weight of sacrifice that others had carried. Very well, Bobby said simply. Thank you for your time. He picked up his wallet and the tablet box, preparing to leave the store without making the purchase. The drive home would be long, and he would need to find another retailer that would honor military discounts with proper respect. At his age, Bobby had learned to choose his battles carefully, and this one didn't seem worth fighting. But as Bobby turned to walk away, Derek called out loudly enough for half the store to hear. Next time, try not wasting people's time if you can't prove what you claim to be. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Around the customer service area, conversation stopped as shoppers turned to stare at the elderly man who had just been publicly humiliated. Bobby's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly, a military bearing asserting itself despite his civilian clothes. He turned back to face Derek with the same steady gaze that had once evaluated enemy positions and calculated tactical responses. I served my country for 2 years in Vietnam, Bobby said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. I earned the right to be treated with basic respect, whether you choose to honor your store's military discount policy or not. Derek felt a momentary flicker of uncertainty at the steel in Bobby's voice, but his pride wouldn't let him back down in front of watching customers. Like I said, anyone can claim to be a veteran. Prove it or don't waste my time. Bobby nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acceptance and quiet determination. He walked toward the exit with measured steps, his back straight despite the arthritis that plagued his knees and the old shrapnel wounds that ached in cold weather. Behind him, the store gradually returned to its normal buzz of activity, though several customers continued to watch his departure with troubled expressions. What none of them realized was that Bobby's interaction with Derek Hoffman had been observed by more than just casual shoppers. Near the video game section, a man in his 50s had watched the entire exchange with growing anger and disbelief. Thomas Garrett, Regional Operations Director for Harrison's Electronics, had been conducting an unannounced store visit when he witnessed his employees' shameful treatment of a veteran. Garrett had served 6 years in the Marine Corps himself, including a deployment to the Persian Gulf. He understood the sacrifice that military service represented and the respect that veterans deserved. More importantly, he knew that Harrison's Electronics had built its reputation partly on its strong support for military families and veterans. As Bobby Martinez disappeared through the store's sliding doors, Thomas Garrett pulled out his cell phone and began making a call that would change Derek Hoffman's life forever. Thomas Garrett ended his phone call with Harrison's Electronics corporate headquarters and slipped the device back into his pocket. The conversation had been brief but definitive. As Regional Operations Director, Garrett had the authority to make immediate personnel decisions, especially when they involved violations of company policy and values. What he had just witnessed constituted both. Derek Hoffman remained behind the customer service counter, unaware that his employment status had just changed dramatically. He processed the next customer's return with his usual efficiency, already dismissing the earlier incident with the old man who couldn't prove his military service. In Derek's mind, he had simply followed company policy and protected Harrison's from potential fraud. Garrett approached the customer service area with purposeful strides. His appearance commanded attention. 6 feet tall with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to leadership responsibility. His civilian clothes couldn't hide the military precision in his movements or the authority in his demeanor. "Mr. Hoffman," Garrett said, his voice carrying across the counter, "I need to speak with you privately." "Now." Derek looked up, surprised to see the regional director at his store without advance notice. Garrett's visits were usually scheduled weeks in advance, allowing management time to prepare and ensure everything met corporate standards. The unexpected appearance could mean anything from a promotion opportunity to a serious problem. "Of course, Mr. Garrett," Derek replied, gesturing to his colleague Sarah to cover the counter. "Is everything all right?" Garrett didn't respond immediately. Instead, he led Derek toward the store manager's office, his expression revealing nothing about the conversation that was about to take place. Other employees noticed the interaction, whispering among themselves about what might warrant such serious attention from corporate leadership. Once inside the office with the door closed, Garrett turned to face Derek directly. "Tell me about your interaction with the elderly gentleman who just left the store." Derek's confidence wavered slightly. The question seemed oddly specific, but he couldn't imagine why the regional director would care about a routine customer service issue. "You mean the guy who wanted a military discount?" He couldn't provide proper identification, so I declined the request according to policy. "Describe exactly what happened," Garrett commanded, his tone leaving no room for evasion. Derek recounted his version of events, emphasizing his adherence to company policy and his professional handling of what he characterized as a difficult customer. He described Bobby's documentation as insufficient and his own decision as protecting the company from potential fraud. Throughout his explanation, Derek remained convinced he had acted appropriately. Garrett listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly stern as Derek's account revealed the full scope of his misconduct. When Derek finished speaking, silence filled the office like a physical presence. "Let me make sure I understand," Garrett said slowly. A 70-year-old man presented a Veterans Affairs medical card and veteran-designated driver's license. "You rejected both documents, questioned his military service publicly, and humiliated him in front of other customers." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "I followed the guidelines about requiring proper identification." "No," Garrett replied firmly. "You ignored company policy, disrespected a veteran, and embarrassed Harrison's Electronics in front of multiple witnesses. VA cards are explicitly listed as acceptable documentation for military discounts. Every employee receives training on this policy." The blood drained from Derek's face as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had been so focused on asserting his authority that he had forgotten the specific details of the military discount policy. The training materials had clearly stated that VA cards constituted valid proof of service, but Derek's arrogance had overridden his actual knowledge. "I was just being careful," Derek protested weakly. "Anyone could have one of those cards." Garrett's expression hardened further. VA cards are issued exclusively to veterans who serve in combat zones or have service-connected disabilities. They require extensive verification and background checks. That gentleman didn't just serve his country. He likely saw combat in Vietnam and earned a right to be treated with dignity and respect. Derek's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he struggled to find words that might salvage the situation. The regional director's military background was well known throughout the company, and Derek suddenly understood why this incident had drawn such serious attention. "Mr. Hoffman," Garrett continued, "Harrison's Electronics has built its reputation on supporting military families and honoring those who served. Our military discount program isn't just good business. It's a reflection of our values as a company. Today, you violated those values and disgraced our brand." The office felt smaller with each word Garrett spoke. Derek's career at Harrison's had been progressing steadily, and he had harbored ambitions of becoming a full store manager within the next year. Those dreams were evaporating as he recognized the severity of his situation. "I can apologize," Derek offered desperately. "I can call him and explain the misunderstanding." Garrett shook his head. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was poor judgment, inadequate training knowledge, and fundamental disrespect for a customer who deserved better. The damage is done. Through the office window, Derek could see the customer service area where other employees continued their work, unaware that their colleague's employment was about to end. Sarah was helping an elderly couple with a television purchase, treating them with the courtesy and patience that Derek had failed to show Bobby Martinez. "What does this mean for my job?" Derek asked, though he already suspected the answer. Garrett's response was swift and unequivocal. "Your employment with Harrison's Electronics is terminated immediately. You'll receive your final paycheck according to company policy, but your access to store systems and facilities ends now." Derek staggered slightly, gripping the edge of the desk for support. 3 years of employment, 8 months as assistant manager, and plans for advancement, all destroyed by 15 minutes of stubborn pride and poor judgment. The full weight of his actions began to settle over him like a suffocating blanket. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings," Garrett continued. "I'll handle the transition of your responsibilities until corporate can arrange proper coverage." As Derek sat in stunned silence, Garrett picked up the office phone and dialed store security. The conversation was brief and professional, arranging for Derek's immediate removal from the premises. When he hung up, Garrett turned back to face the former assistant manager. "This could have been avoided," Garrett said quietly. "If you had simply followed policy, treated that veteran with respect, or even asked for help when you were uncertain, none of this would have happened. Instead, you chose arrogance over humility and pride over professionalism." Derek wanted to argue, to explain his reasoning, to somehow convince the regional director that termination was too extreme a punishment. But the words wouldn't come. Deep down, he knew that his treatment of Bobby Martinez had been inexcusable, regardless of policy questions or documentation requirements. Security arrived within minutes. 2 uniformed guards who had worked with Derek for months, but now maintained professional distance as they escorted him through the store. Other employees stopped their work to watch the procession, whispers spreading quickly about what could have caused such drastic action. Sarah looked up from the customer service counter with confusion and concern as Derek was led past. He avoided eye contact with his colleagues, his face burning with shame and embarrassment. The customers who had witnessed his confrontation with Bobby Martinez watched with obvious satisfaction, understanding that justice had been served. At Derek's locker, the security guards supervised while he packed his few personal items into a cardboard box. His company polo shirts would remain behind, no longer needed for a job he had lost through his own poor choices. The nameplate from his desk joined his belongings, a tangible reminder of authority he had abused and lost. As Derek was escorted toward the exit, Thomas Garrett was already on his phone with corporate headquarters, arranging for immediate disciplinary action training for all customer service staff and reviewing the store's military discount policy implementation. The incident with Bobby Martinez had revealed gaps in training and supervision that needed immediate attention. Derek's final view of Harrison's Electronics was the same sliding doors through which Bobby Martinez had walked just an hour earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. Both men had left the store that afternoon, but only one had done so with dignity intact. Outside in the parking lot, Derek sat in his car for several minutes before starting the engine. His phone buzzed with text messages from coworkers who had heard about his termination, but he couldn't bring himself to read them. The drive home would give him time to consider how to explain to his girlfriend, his parents, and his friends that his career had ended because he couldn't show basic respect to a Vietnam veteran. Meanwhile, Thomas Garrett was already implementing changes to ensure that no other veteran would face similar treatment at any Harrison's Electronics location. Bobby Martinez might never know it, but his quiet dignity in the face of disrespect was about to improve the experience for thousands of other veterans across the country. Bobby Martinez drove home in thoughtful silence, his hands steady on the steering wheel despite the arthritis that made long drives uncomfortable. The 45-minute journey back to Millerville gave him time to process what had happened at Harrison's Electronics. At 72, he had experienced enough disappointment and discrimination to recognize it quickly, but the sting never completely faded. The small apartment Bobby called home sat on the second floor of a converted Victorian house. His landlady, Mrs. Chun, had specifically sought military tenants after her own son served in Afghanistan. She kept the rent reasonable and maintained the property with care, understanding that many veterans lived on fixed incomes. Bobby climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the familiar ache in his knees that worsened with weather changes and stress. Inside his modest living space, Bobby set the unopened tablet box on his kitchen table and stared at it for several minutes. The device represented more than just technology. It was his planned connection to family members scattered across the globe. His daughter, Jennifer, lived in Portland with her 2 teenage children, while his son Michael served as a staff sergeant at a base in Germany. Video calls would let Bobby see his grandchildren grow up and stay connected with his son's military career. The landline phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Jennifer's voice came through clearly, carrying the warmth that always brightened Bobby's day. "Hi, Dad. How's your weekend going? Did you get that tablet you've been researching?" Bobby hesitated, unsure how to explain the afternoon's events without worrying his daughter. Jennifer had inherited her mother's protective instincts and Bobby's stubborn sense of justice. She would be furious if she knew how he had been treated. "I'm still working on it," Bobby said carefully. "The store I visited today didn't have exactly what I needed." Jennifer's tone shifted slightly, picking up on something in her father's voice. "Everything okay? You sound tired." Bobby walked to his living room window, which offered a view of Millerville's Main Street. The small town moved at a pace that suited him now, far removed from the chaos of combat zones and the hustle of the construction work that had supported his family for decades after Vietnam. "Just a long day," Bobby replied. "How are the kids? Is Emma still planning to try out for soccer?" Jennifer accepted the change of subject, launching into updates about her children's activities and achievements. Bobby listened with genuine interest, filing away details to share in the video calls he still hoped to make possible. His granddaughter Emma was developing into an impressive athlete, while his grandson Tyler showed academic promise that reminded Bobby of his own love of learning. After the call ended, Bobby prepared a simple dinner and settled into his favorite chair with a book about World War II aviation. Reading had become one of his primary entertainments, particularly military history that helped him understand his own service within the broader context of American conflicts. The local library's veterans section was well stocked, thanks partly to Bobby's own donations of books he had finished reading. Around 8 o'clock, Bobby's phone rang again. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Bobby normally didn't answer unknown calls, but something prompted him to pick up. "Mr. Martinez? This is Thomas Garrett from Harrison's Electronics. I'm the regional operations director for the company." Bobby straightened in his chair, unsure why a corporate executive would be calling him personally. "Yes, how can I help you?" Garrett's voice carried both authority and genuine remorse. "I'm calling to personally apologize for the treatment you received at our store today. What happened was completely unacceptable and contrary to everything our company stands for." The call took Bobby by surprise. In his experience, corporate responses to customer complaints usually involve form letters and scripted responses from customer service representatives. Direct contact from a regional director suggested something unusual had occurred. "That's thoughtful of you to call," Bobby replied diplomatically. "I understand that individual employees don't always represent company policies accurately. Mr. Martinez, I need you to know that the employee who treated you with disrespect is no longer with our company. His termination was immediate and final. What he did to you is wrong, and there will be consequences." Bobby absorbed this information slowly. He had hoped the young man might receive additional training or counseling, not lose his job entirely. Despite Derek's rude behavior, Bobby understood how devastating unemployment could be, especially for someone just building a career. "That seems like a rather severe response," Bobby said thoughtfully. Perhaps some additional training would have been sufficient. Garrett's respect for Bobby increased with each word. Even after being humiliated and disrespected, the veteran was showing concern for his mistreater's welfare. Mr. Martinez, that employee violated clear company policy, disrespected a veteran, and embarrassed our brand in front of multiple customers. His actions reflected values that are incompatible with our company culture. I appreciate your concern for the situation, Bobby said. I've encountered worse treatment than what happened today, and I survived it. I hope the young man learns from this experience. Garrett paused, struck by Bobby's grace under circumstances that would have left many people demanding revenge or compensation. Sir, if I may ask, what was your service record? I served 6 years in the Marines myself, and I recognize a fellow veteran when I meet one. Bobby's voice took on the matter-of-fact tone he used when discussing his military service. 1st Infantry Division, 2 tours in Vietnam from 67 to 69. I was a platoon sergeant during the Tet Offensive and some of the fighting that followed. Garrett's breath caught. The 1st Infantry Division had seen some of the heaviest combat in Vietnam, and anyone who served as a platoon sergeant during Tet had faced conditions that most people couldn't imagine. The casual way Bobby mentioned his service spoke to experiences that had forged him into the dignified man who had walked away from confrontation rather than escalated. Mr. Martinez, your service record makes what happened today even more inexcusable. I want to personally invite you back to our store tomorrow morning. I'll be there to ensure you receive the respect and assistance you deserve. Bobby considered the offer. His initial instinct was to find a different retailer rather than return to a place where he had been embarrassed, but something in Garrett's tone suggested genuine sincerity. That's very kind of you, but I don't want to cause any additional trouble. You wouldn't be causing trouble, Garrett assured him. You'd be giving us a chance to demonstrate our actual values instead of the poor example you witnessed today. Harrison's Electronics has a strong commitment to supporting veterans, and I'd like to show you what that really looks like. After some gentle persuasion, Bobby agreed to return the following morning. Garrett promised to personally handle the transaction and ensure that Bobby received both the military discount and the level of service that the company prided itself on providing. When the call ended, Bobby sat quietly in his chair, processing the unexpected turn of events. He had left the store expecting never to return, resigned to finding another retailer for his tablet purchase. Now he faced the prospect of going back to a place where he had been humiliated, but with the promise that things would be different. Bobby's military training had taught him to evaluate people quickly and accurately. Something in Thomas Garrett's voice suggested a man of genuine integrity, someone who understood the weight of service and the respect that veterans deserved. The regional director's own military background probably explained his strong reaction to Derek's behavior. As Bobby prepared for bed, he found himself thinking about the young employee who had lost his job. Derek's rudeness had been inexcusable, but Bobby hoped the experience would teach him valuable lessons about respect and humility. Sometimes the hardest consequences produced the most meaningful personal growth. Bobby's last thought before sleep was about his planned video calls with Jennifer and Michael. Tomorrow, if everything went as Thomas Garrett promised, he would finally have the technology to see his family's faces while talking to them. The simple pleasure of watching his grandchildren grow up through a screen seemed more precious now after nearly being denied by one person's prejudice and poor judgment. In his dreams, Bobby found himself back in Vietnam, leading his platoon through dangerous territory. But instead of the weight of weapons and equipment, he carried the same quiet dignity that had sustained him through decades of civilian life. Some burdens became lighter with time, while others, like the responsibility to treat people with respect, remained as important as ever. Bobby Martinez arrived at Harrison's Electronics 15 minutes before the store opened, sitting quietly in his pickup truck while employees prepared for the day. The parking lot gradually filled with staff members arriving for their Saturday shifts, most of them young people who moved with the energy of those just beginning their working careers. Bobby watched them through his windshield, wondering if any had heard about the previous day's incident. At exactly 10 o'clock, Thomas Garrett appeared at the store entrance, easily recognizable by his confident bearing and professional attire. He spotted Bobby's truck immediately and walked over with purposeful strides, his expression conveying both respect and determination to make things right. "Mr. Martinez, thank you for giving us this second chance," Garrett said as Bobby climbed out of his vehicle. "I promise today will be completely different from yesterday's experience." Bobby shook Garrett's extended hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that spoke to military training and leadership experience. "I appreciate you taking the time to personally address this situation." Garrett led Bobby toward the store entrance, passing other customers who were beginning to gather for the Saturday opening. "Before we go inside, I want you to know that I've spent the morning reviewing our military discount policies with the entire staff. Every employee now understands exactly what documentation is acceptable and how veterans should be treated." The automatic doors slid open to reveal a transformed customer service area. Sarah Williams, the employee who had worked alongside Derek the previous day, stood behind the counter with a welcoming smile. She had volunteered to work early specifically to assist with Bobby's visit, determined to show that not all Harrison's employees shared Derek's poor judgment. "Mr. Martinez," Sarah said warmly as they approached. "I'm Sarah, and I want to personally apologize for what happened yesterday. I should have intervened when I saw how my colleague was treating you." Bobby studied the young woman's face, recognizing genuine remorse and embarrassment. "Thank you for saying that, but you're not responsible for someone else's behavior." Garrett gestured toward a comfortable seating area near the customer service counter. "Sarah is one of our most knowledgeable staff members when it comes to tablets and mobile devices. She's going to help you find exactly what you need and ensure you understand all the features." For the next hour, Sarah patiently walked Bobby through various tablet options, explaining technical specifications in clear, understandable terms. She demonstrated video calling applications, showed him how to adjust text size for easier reading, and explained the differences between various models. Her expertise was evident, but more importantly, she treated Bobby with the dignity and respect that every customer deserved. Bobby appreciated Sarah's thoroughness, but he had already researched his purchase extensively. The tablet he had selected the previous day remained his preferred choice, offering the right balance of features and affordability for his needs. Sarah confirmed that his selection was excellent for video calling and basic internet use. "That's a great choice for staying connected with family," Sarah said enthusiastically. "The camera quality is excellent for video calls, and the battery life will easily handle long conversations." When they moved to complete the purchase, Garrett personally verified Bobby's veteran status using his VA card and driver's license. The process took less than 30 seconds, confirming what Derek should have recognized immediately, that Bobby's documentation was not only legitimate, but represented service in one of America's most challenging conflicts. 15% military discount brings your total to $296.65, Sarah announced. "And Mr. Garrett has arranged for complimentary setup service and basic training on the device." Bobby looked surprised at the additional offer. "That's very generous, but not necessary." Garrett smiled. "It's our pleasure. Harrison's Electronics wants to ensure you get maximum value from your purchase. Technology can be overwhelming, and we want you to feel confident using your new tablet." Sarah spent another 30 minutes showing Bobby how to set up email accounts, download video calling applications, and navigate the device's basic functions. She wrote down simple instructions for common tasks and provided her direct phone number for any future questions. Her patience and expertise transformed what could have been a confusing technical experience into an enjoyable learning session. Other customers in the store observed the exceptional service Bobby was receiving, many commenting positively on the staff's professionalism and helpfulness. Word spread quickly among employees that the elderly gentleman was a Vietnam veteran who deserved their very best efforts. The contrast with the previous day's treatment couldn't have been more striking. As the transaction neared completion, Garrett asked quietly, "Mr. Martinez, would you mind sharing a bit about your military service? I think it would mean a lot to our younger employees to hear from someone with your experience." Bobby hesitated, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. "I'm not much for speeches. "Nothing formal," Garrett assured him. "Just a few words about your service. These young people need to understand what sacrifice looks like." Gradually, a small group of employees gathered around the customer service area. Sarah had quietly spread word that they had a genuine Vietnam veteran in the store, someone who had served during one of the most controversial periods in American history. The staff members who assembled represented different ages and backgrounds, but they shared common curiosity about Bobby's experiences. Bobby found himself sharing basic details about his service with the 1st Infantry Division, the challenges of combat in Vietnam, and the difficulty of returning to a country divided over the war. He spoke without bitterness about the protests and hostility that many veterans faced, emphasizing instead the importance of treating all people with respect regardless of their backgrounds or beliefs. "The hardest part wasn't the fighting," Bobby said quietly. "It was coming home to people who questioned whether we should have been there at all. But we served because our country asked us to, and we did our duty regardless of politics or popular opinion." Sarah listened with rapt attention, thinking about her own grandfather who had served in Korea but rarely talked about his experiences. She began to understand why Derek's treatment of Bobby had been so particularly offensive. He had dismissed someone who had sacrificed for freedoms that Derek took for granted. One young employee asked about the difference between military life and civilian careers. Bobby's answer was thoughtful and measured. "The military teaches you that the mission comes first, but you take care of your people. In civilian life, you should take care of your customers the same way you'd take care of your fellow soldiers." Garrett nodded approvingly at Bobby's words. The veteran was providing better customer service training than most corporate seminars, using real-world experience to illustrate principles of respect, duty, and professionalism. When an informal gathering concluded, Bobby completed his purchase and prepared to leave. The tablet was safely packaged, along with Sarah's handwritten instructions and her contact information for technical support. The military discount had saved him over $50, money that would help stretch his fixed income further. "Mr. Martinez," Garrett said as they walked toward the exit, "I want you to know that your visit today has had a positive impact on every employee who met you. You've reminded us what honorable service looks like and how we should treat each other." Bobby paused at the sliding doors, the same exit through which he had left in disappointment 24 hours earlier. "Thank you for making this right. It would have been easy to ignore what happened yesterday, but you chose to do something about it." Garrett extended his hand for a final handshake. "Veterans like you made it possible for people like me to serve. It's the least we could do to honor that sacrifice." As Bobby drove away from Harrison's Electronics for the second time, his experience couldn't have been more different from the previous day. His tablet sat safely on the passenger seat, along with confidence that he could successfully use it to connect with his family. More importantly, he carried renewed faith that respect and dignity still mattered in customer service and human interactions. Behind him, the Harrison's Electronics staff were already implementing lessons learned from Bobby's visit. Sarah had volunteered to become the store's veteran liaison, while Garrett was drafting new training protocols to ensure that military customers always received appropriate recognition and respect. The ripple effects of Derek's poor judgment and Bobby's quiet dignity were spreading far beyond one afternoon's confrontation, touching lives and changing attitudes throughout the entire organization. 3 weeks after Bobby Martinez's visit to Harrison's Electronics, the ripple effects of that weekend continued to spread in ways that no one could have anticipated. Corporate headquarters had used the incident as a case study for customer service excellence, while Thomas Garrett found himself fielding calls from other regional directors seeking guidance on veteran outreach programs. Bobby's apartment had been transformed by his new tablet. The device sat prominently on his kitchen table, no longer an intimidating piece of technology, but a bridge connecting him to family across the globe. His first video call with Jennifer had moved both of them to tears. Seeing each other's faces while talking brought an intimacy that phone conversations couldn't match. "Dad, you look great," Jennifer had said during their initial call, wiping away tears as she saw her father's face clearly for the first time in months. "And your apartment looks so nice and organized." Bobby's video calls with his son Michael in Germany had become weekly highlights, allowing him to see his boy in uniform and hear firsthand accounts of military life in the modern era. The technology gap between father and son had narrowed considerably, replaced by shared understanding of service commitment and duty to country. Emma and Tyler, Bobby's grandchildren, had embraced video calling with the enthusiasm of digital natives. They showed him school projects, demonstrated new skills, and shared daily adventures with their grandfather. Bobby found himself more involved in their lives than ever before, despite the geographical distance. Sarah Williams had emerged as an unexpected champion of veteran services at Harrison's Electronics. Her experience helping Bobby had inspired her to research veteran issues and volunteer with local veteran organizations. She had proposed creating a special veteran shopping program that would provide personalized assistance and guaranteed military discounts, an idea that corporate leadership enthusiastically embraced. Veterans deserve more than just discounts, Sarah explained to Thomas Garrett during a planning meeting. They deserve to be recognized for their service and treated with the dignity they've earned. Garrett had been promoted to Vice President of Customer Experience, largely based on his handling of the Bobby Martinez incident. Corporate executives recognized that his military background and commitment to veteran services aligned perfectly with the company's values and marketing objectives. His first major initiative was implementing veteran appreciation programs across all Harrison's Electronics locations. Meanwhile, Derek Hoffman's life had taken a dramatically different path. The termination from Harrison's Electronics had forced him to confront his attitudes and behavior in ways that steady employment had allowed him to avoid. After weeks of unsuccessful job hunting, he had begun working at a small family-owned electronics repair shop for significantly less money than his previous position. The repair shop owner, Maria Santos, was a stern woman in her 60s who had built her business through hard work and treating customers with unwavering respect. She had hired Derek reluctantly, aware of his termination from Harrison's, but willing to give him a second chance if he could prove he had learned from his mistakes. Everyone who walks through that door deserves to be treated like family, Maria had told Derek on his first day. I don't care if they're buying a $1,000 computer or asking for directions to the bathroom. Respect costs nothing and pays dividends forever. Derek's new job required him to interact with customers who often had limited knowledge about technology. Many were elderly residents who needed patience and careful explanation, forcing him to develop the customer service skills he had previously neglected. The work was humbling but educational, gradually teaching him lessons about humility and service that his previous position had failed to instill. One afternoon, Derek found himself helping an elderly veteran who was trying to recover photos from a damaged smartphone. The man's military service came up naturally during their conversation, and Derek felt a familiar flutter of skepticism before catching himself. His automatic doubt about the customer's military service reminded him painfully of the incident that had cost him his career. "Thank you for your service," Derek said quietly, meaning the words for perhaps the first time in his life. The veteran smiled and nodded appreciatively. "Just did my job, son. Same as you're doing yours." That evening, Derek went online and researched Bobby Martinez, using the name he remembered from the credit card transaction. What he discovered left him stunned and deeply ashamed. Bobby wasn't just any Vietnam veteran. He was a decorated combat soldier who had earned multiple medals for valor under fire. Newspaper archives showed photos of Bobby receiving commendations from military leaders, while veteran organization websites listed him as a respected member of their communities. The man Derek had dismissed as potentially fraudulent had risked his life repeatedly for his country, leading soldiers through some of the most dangerous combat of the Vietnam War. His quiet dignity in the face of Derek's disrespect took on new meaning when viewed against the backdrop of genuine heroism and sacrifice. Derek drafted several apology letters to Bobby, but ultimately couldn't find words adequate to express his regret. How do you apologize to someone whose service record makes your own civilian concerns seem trivial? Instead, Derek began volunteering at a local veteran center, helping elderly veterans with technology problems and computer training. The volunteer work brought Derek into contact with men and women whose service spanned from World War II through recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. Each veteran had stories of sacrifice and service that gradually opened Derek's eyes to the weight of military commitment. His work with these veterans became a form of penance, though none of them knew about his past behavior toward Bobby Martinez. Bobby remained unaware of Derek's volunteer work or his struggle with guilt and redemption. The incident at Harrison's Electronics had become a minor episode in Bobby's life, overshadowed by the joy of regular communication with his family and growing comfort with modern technology. He had begun teaching basic computer skills to other residents at the local senior center, sharing knowledge that Sarah Williams had helped him acquire. Thomas Garrett occasionally checked in with Bobby by phone, maintaining a friendship that had developed from their shared military background. During one conversation, Garrett mentioned the company-wide changes that had resulted from Bobby's experience. "Your visit changed how we think about customer service," Garrett explained. "We've implemented veteran training for all employees and created special recognition programs. You've made things better for thousands of veterans across the country." Bobby listened with characteristic humility. "I'm glad something positive came from a difficult situation. That young man who lost his job. I hope he learned from the experience and found something better." Garrett didn't mention Derek's volunteer work at the Veteran Center, though he had learned about it through mutual contacts in the veteran community. Some redemption stories were meant to unfold quietly, without fanfare or recognition. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Bobby sat in his apartment video calling with his entire family. Jennifer and her children were gathered around their tablet in Portland, while Michael called in from his barracks in Germany. The technology that had once seemed impossibly complex now felt natural and essential. "Grandpa, tell us about Vietnam," Emma requested, her 12-year-old curiosity drawn to stories of adventure and heroism. Bobby considered his response carefully. His grandchildren were old enough to hear simplified versions of his experiences, stories that emphasized duty and courage without dwelling on the trauma and loss that had shaped his generation of veterans. "We served because our country needed us," Bobby said simply. "Just like your Uncle Michael serves today. The important thing isn't the fighting, it's taking care of the people around you and doing your duty even when it's difficult." Through the screen, Bobby could see his son Michael nodding in understanding. Military service connected the generations, creating bonds that transcended time and geography. The tablet that had nearly been denied to him by one person's prejudice now carried forward the stories and values that defined his family's commitment to service. As the video call concluded and Bobby prepared for bed, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just 3 weeks. Technology had bridged distances he had thought unbridgeable, while unexpected kindness from strangers had restored his faith in human decency. Sometimes the worst experiences led to the best outcomes, teaching lessons about resilience and redemption that no classroom could provide. Outside his window, Millerville settled into Sunday evening quiet, a peaceful small town where a Vietnam veteran could age with dignity and stay connected to the family he had worked his entire life to support. The tablet's soft glow in the darkness represented more than technology. It symbolized the connections that make service and sacrifice worthwhile, linking past and future in the simple act of seeing loved ones' faces while sharing their daily lives.